Welcome back. So in this first section, what we're going to do is we're going to take all the chords that we've learned up until this point, and I'm going to show you an interesting concept that is very prevalent in music, but I hope to make it very plain and tell you where it came from and how you can best use it and understand it to actually start playing real patterns as soon as possible. But it's this idea of the diatonic chords. And diatonic just means coming from the scale. It's one of those fancy words. It just means created by the major scale. So I'm going to teach you how to actually take the chords that you've already learned and your understanding of the scales and kind of mesh the two concepts, because in every key, and we know that there's 12 keys, right? In every key, there are natural chords that are created off that key scale. So I can go to the key of C major, for example, and as you already know, and you should have mastered this, the key of C major is simply all the white keys, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. We also know from prior DVDs that it's best to number the scale. So C is not just C, but we understand that C is 1, D is 2, E is 3, F is 4, G is 5, A is 6, and B is 7. And I'm going faster because that's basically a review. The concept I want to explain to you now is that we can actually create chords off of every tone of this scale. But what you need to understand is that concept of tertian chords. Remember, in chord counting, we talked about tertian. Now, tertian means 3. They're chords built off of thirds. And if you understand what we talked about so far, you know that a third encompasses 3 alphabet letters. So C to E, for example, is a third because we have a C, we have a D in the middle, and we have an E. So all together, we got 3 alphabet letters encompassed in this interval. Therefore, it is a third. Now, when you add up the half steps, you know, it has 4 half steps in between it, you understand that it's a major third. Now, whereas this, that's a minor third. It still encompasses 3 alphabet letters, D with the E in the middle and the F on the edge. So we still get 3 alphabet letters here between this D and F, but it doesn't have 4 half steps. This particular one has 3 half steps. That's 3 half steps. So we call that a minor third. And pretty much when it comes to tertian intervals, you're mostly dealing with major thirds and minor thirds. When you combine them together and put one on the bottom and one on the top, you're either going to get a major chord, a minor chord, a diminished chord, or an augmented chord. We talked about that, right? Major chords have that major third on the bottom, but a minor third on top, and when you combine them together, you get yourself a major chord. Whereas the minor chord, remember what we talked about? It had that minor third on the bottom, but it had a major third on top. Combine those together, and you got yourself a minor chord. And pretty much going up the scale, that's what we're going to do. We're going to create tertian chords. Now, I said all of that to say this. Pretty much with tertian chords, they skip every other alphabet letter. If you remember that, Jermaine said it. Don't worry about this and that. Just remember tertian chords skip every other alphabet letter. Now, in the key of C, we make it pretty easy because it's all white notes. So you're going to notice when we create these chords that all we're going to do is skip fingers in the key of C. Now, when you get into other keys where we're mixing white notes and black notes, like the key of D flat major, it's not going to be as apparent, but we're still skipping alphabet letters. We're skipping every other scale tone. Okay, so since we have 7 notes in the scale, we're taking every other note until we get 3, and we're playing them together to create chords off of every tone of the scale, and specifically tertian chords, because tertian chords skip every other alphabet letter. They have 3 notes per interval because they're tertian. Tertian means what? 3. This is all review here. That's why I'm going fast. So we're going to do that. Let's see what we come up with by taking every other note of the scale. So in the key of C, when we do that off the first tone of the scale, when we take every other note, we get a major chord. So I want you to write that down. And we're not only dealing in the key of C, we're going to talk universally. So we're going to do this with numbers. So off the first tone of the scale, write this down. Off the first tone of the scale, it creates a major chord. Because when you take every other note, when you build tertian chords, which Western music is built off of tertian chords, all the chords, major, minor, dominant, diminished, sevenths, ninths, 11ths, 13ths, until you get into altered chords, pretty much all the regular chords you're used to playing, even the bigger ones, they're tertian chords. They're built off of these little thirds. These are all thirds, okay? Every other note. And C major really shows that clearly because it's all white notes. So C, E, G, that's the first tone of the scale, and it creates a major chord. Let's just shift over every other note. So now what are we doing? Well, we're taking the second tone of the scale and we're creating a tertian chord. And we get D, F, A. Now, if you took the previous DVDs and transposed them to all 12 keys, you'll know that not only is this a minor chord, but it sounds different. It sounds more solemn. Look at the difference between, that's a more, I mean, they're happy, you know, and the minor chords, they're kind of serious, you know, and even that D minor, same thing, you know, it's kind of sadder, you know. So what we do, we just do that all the way up the keyboard. Off of E, take every other note, and get yourself a minor chord as well. So the second, let's back up, the second tone is minor, write that down. The third tone of the scale is going to create a minor chord as well, write that down. Let's do that same concept off of the fourth tone of the scale, which is F. Every other note, what do we get? Even just by listening to it, does it sound major or minor? Happy or more serious? Well, you should have got a major chord, F major here. Take every other note of G, and what are we doing here? I'm just quizzing you. We're creating tertian triads, chords built off of thirds, every other alphabet letter, or intervals that encompass 3 alphabet letters, however you want to think about it. The fifth tone of the scale creates a major chord. Do that on the sixth tone of the scale. What does that sound like? You should know, minor. Even, you know, you may know that A, C, E, yeah, that's a minor chord, but actually unlock that ear to hear it even before you see it. If you're listening to this in an audio format, you should be able to hear that that's minor. So sixth tone of the scale, also known as the Aeolian mode you learned, it creates a minor chord. And then the last tone of the scale, remember I said usually major or minor? Well, that's not true. For the first 6 tones it is, but when you get to the 7th tone of any scale, but this B, D, F in the key of C, that creates a diminished chord. And now you're back home. So let me recap. If you take every other tone of the scale, and then you do it, doesn't matter if you go up, down, it'll create a particular chord. So on C, major, D, minor, E, minor, F, major, G, major, A, minor, B, diminished, and C, major. Now I have a confession, I actually failed you because I called it in alphabet letters, and that's fine if we want to handicap ourselves to the key of C. But like I said, this thing is in 12s. What you learn in one key, you want to be able to copy it, like make a carbon copy of it in another key, because everything is the same. So I'm going to do it one more time, but I'm going to do it the way I advocate more, the universal language. The 1 is major if you take every other note off the 1 of the scale. The 2 is minor. The 3 is minor. The 4 is major. The 5 is major. The 6 is minor. The 7 is diminished. And we're back at the 1. So that is the role of music. So when you actually look at it, here's the first concept I want you to understand. If you're listening to a song and you get good at picking out the bass note, okay, let's just say you're really good right now picking out the bass. So you hear a bass line. Let's say the bass line is going. So say you hear that bass line. Now, and you're good at it. You can hear the bass line, and I congratulate you. If you're able to do that, you're very good. Because that's what I advocate. If you're in the car, listen to the bass, because whatever the bass player is playing, or if it's a solo pianist, listen to that lowest note, and that'll tell you the pattern going on. And what you do is try to numeralize it. I don't know if that's a word, but try to change it into numbers. Because unless you're 1 in 10,000 people that have perfect pitch, and let me tell you a secret, you don't need perfect pitch. There is no reason for perfect pitch to play music. Let me tell you, I might get in trouble, but there is no reason to have perfect pitch to play music. In fact, some people that have perfect pitch, they walk around irritated because the pianos aren't tuned the right way, or people are not singing it in the right key, or they're in between keys. That just irks them. So some people wish they didn't have it, but you don't need perfect pitch. What you really need is relative pitch. So it doesn't matter so as much that I'm playing C going to A, and A going to D, and D going to G. That doesn't really matter. But if you have relative pitch, what you hear is, I hear, that's the tonic, or another way to say that, that's home bass. And that's going to the 6th tone. Some people have relative pitch in the sense of numbers. They really got that number system down, and they know how a 1 bass going to the 6th of the key. They know how that sounds. Other people, they think intervallically. In other words, they know how a minor third sounds going down. They know that they've mastered that relationship. So essentially, it doesn't matter what key they're in. Hear how it's different, but it's really not different. I'm playing a bunch of minor thirds there. So it's different, but it's not different. Yeah, when we take it to another key, yes, when we move it up or down, it's gonna sound different in pitch, but the relationship is gonna be the same. It's still gonna sound relatively the same. And that's what's really needed in playing by ear. I could care less that you know what C going to A sounds like. It's great, don't get me wrong. Adding perfect pitch with really good relative pitch, you're a superstar, but it's not needed. Just understanding how to hear a 1 chord going to a 6 chord, and the 6 chord going to a 2 chord, and the 2 chord going to the 5. And as you hear that more, then you'll be able to pick out songs. So that's my first concept. My first concept is listen to what the bass is doing. So if you can figure out what the bass is doing, usually the bass is going to be playing tones that are part of the scale, right? So let's just take that bass. That bass was going from the 1 to the 6 to the 2. Some of you guys might write this down. So put right on a piece of paper, 1, 6, 2, 5, and then I did a 3, 6, 2, 5, 1. So let me show you that in music. So I went from the first key of C, which is C, to A, which is the 6th tone of C. I'm helping you cheat right now, but you really need to know the numbers. Then I went from A to the 2nd tone of C, which is D. I went from D to the 5th tone of C, which is G, and then I did this little walk down. I used the 4th tone, but it's just a passing tone. We don't stay there long. So I did the 4th tone, but I really wanted to go to the 3rd tone just to repeat the same thing all over again, but this time starting on the 3rd tone of the scale, which is E, to the 6th tone, which is A, to the 2nd tone, which is D, to the 5th tone, which is G, and then I come back home to the 1 chord. So if you understand that pattern that's going on, now take the diatonic chords that I just showed you and put them with it. That's all you do. Okay, now I won't say that this will work all the time, but it's like Pareto Principle. For some of you guys that don't know the principle, that's the 80-20 rule. 20% of things create 80% of the results, or 80% of what you do is responsible for 20% of the results. Well, I'll say that using the diatonic chords we've just covered off of every tone of the scale, it'll work 80% of the time usually, because there's a reason these are diatonic chords. They naturally happen. They sound good. They feel good when they're in these positions. When the first tone of the scale is major, we have a feeling of rest. Okay? It feels like it's supposed to be there. Her fleece was white as snow. It's supposed to be there. So that's not just by chance that the first tone of the scale is major. No, it has a propensity to be that. It's supposed to be that. The second tone is supposed to be minor. There are times, and it's that small 20% of the equation, when we don't do these diatonic chords. Instead of doing a D minor off the second tone of the scale, sometimes we're doing a D major off the second tone or a major chord off the second tone. We call this a secondary dominant, which you'll get into in my 300-page course and stuff. You know, there's some times when it's not the normal diatonic chords, but those should be the exceptions, not the rules. So that's my first technique. Figure out the bass and then throw these chords with it. So with that bass line I just showed you, what would be the chords? Well, you tell me. Let's go to our piano. And off the first tone of the scale, I would automatically try C major because that's the diatonic chord that works with it. Off of the sixth tone, I would go to A minor because that's what works with it. Off of the second tone, I would go to D minor because that's what works with it. Off the fifth tone, I would go to G major because that's the diatonic chord that's created off of the fifth tone. On the third tone, I would go to E minor. Off the sixth tone again, I would go to A minor. Off the second tone, I'll go back to D minor. And then off the fifth tone, I'll go to G major, and then I'll be back home. Now that's a lot of moving around. So you'll want to use inversion. So instead of, you know, going from here to here, you can actually keep this C major the same. And when you go to A, you can either keep it the same or you can move it down to play an A minor 7. And you should have learned this. A minor 7 is pretty much, see, it's like that. It really is a C major chord over A. And you don't have to play the A again. So you play it down here, you can move the G down here, or you can keep it there. You know, you could just do, a lot of people just keep the chord the same. When you go to that D minor over here, you know, figure out the easiest inversion. You know, some people go to here, but that's kind of too far away. So some people just move these two notes and they'll do here. But I'm not here to show you that. JP will talk about that a little later, chord progressions and stuff like that. But the idea is, first, pick the diatonic chord that works. Then you can invert it to make it closer to each other. You can use bigger and better chords once you kind of know what's going on. And you'll naturally do this as you get better and better. But the idea is, these are the chords that go with the scale. Know them, master them in every key. How do I take this to a new key? Let's go to the key of G. Bam, I just take every other note of the scale. So off of the first tone, that's a G major. Off the second tone, that's an A minor. Off the third tone, that's a B minor. Off the fourth tone, that's a C major. Off the fifth tone, that's a D major. I'm just taking every other note of that scale. It almost looks like C major, but since G has an F sharp in it, you can't use an F. You have to use F sharp. Remember, these come from taking every other tone of the scale. Off of E, E minor. And then the only other difference is we have this F sharp, what? Diminished. And then we're back home. So it's very easy. And actually, I would encourage you to probably stop the tape right here and actually take this to every key. Have you a little 5-star notebook, 1 page per key, and go C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C on each line, and then fill in the chord. Bam, flip the page, do it with D, you know, and then go all the way up, or do it with C sharp. You can go chromatically all the way up until you've gotten all the diatonic chords. And really it should be simple because you already learned the chords. Really it's just applying the right chord, that right formula to the tone of the scale. So that's the first part. In the next part, we're going to talk about the circle of fifths. So put your seatbelt on. We're really going somewhere.